I have Robert Bryce here today. And Robert, do you want to talk a little bit about your work or yourself?
Well, it's my favorite subject, Tom. Of course I do. Well, first things first, I'm a very lucky man. I'm grateful for, what I have. My wife and I are together for 40 years. Married, I'll be 37 years in June. We have 3 great kids, Mary, Michael, and Jacob, and they're all grown and healthy and out of the house, which is a beautiful thing. Empty nest is a beautiful thing. I'm an author. I'm a journalist. I'm a podcaster, film producer. I write about energy and power and have been for more than 30 years. Interested in all things having to do with energy and power, both here in Texas, in the U.S., and around the world, and been very fortunate. I was in Japan last month looking at the nuclear sector, and now looking at transformer supply chains in the U.S. Those are the latest things I've been writing about. So plenty to talk about, Tom.
I really enjoyed watching your movie, Juice. Do you want to talk about that at all, just to start? It was really good. I can't believe I didn't know about it beforehand.
Well, thank you. Yes, I'm the executive producer of a feature-length documentary. It's called Juice, How Electricity Explains the World. Came out about 3 years ago. You can find it. It's available now for free on YouTube. If you go to Gravitas Ventures, it's there, but it's also on all the major streaming platforms. We went to India, Iceland, Lebanon, Puerto Rico, looking at the world through the lens of electricity. So we tell the human story of electricity and why power equals power. So I'm proud of that film, and wrote it while I was, or maybe actually produced it while I was writing my 6th book. And since we're in promotion mode, Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. I made a documentary and wrote a book at the same time. I don't recommend it, but I done did it, and I'm proud that I've done it, but I don't recommend it. The paperback for Question of Power, by the way, will be out next month, May 15th or 16th. So that's another bit of publishing that's happening. So yeah, all good.
Wait a minute, I missed it. Which part is out next month?
The paperback. So the hardcover version came out 3 years ago when the COVID lockdown started. So now they're finally, my publisher, I quite like his public affairs, and they're finally getting around to publishing the paperback. So that'll be out in a few weeks.
Okay, so I have the Kindle version, and then is there going to be an Audible version too?
Oh, there's an Audible version.
There is. Okay.
I actually did I did the Audible. I recorded it myself, which was great fun. I've had the first time of my written 6 books, and this is the first one I've been able to do my own audio. So yeah, that's out there too.
Do you want to talk about your all of the different testimony that you've done, Senate and House testimony? You've done a lot of that, right?
Well, I've testified before Congress 6 times. The most recent was in November of 2021. It was in front of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and at that time we were talking about energy prices. And at that time, remember, this was 3 months before Russia invaded Ukraine. And I was talking about what was happening in Europe, because the energy crisis in Europe started months before Russia invaded Ukraine. So that problem that the Europeans rather drove themselves into the ditch, and they were well into the ditch long before the Russian invasion. So that was the focus of my testimony most recently. But yes, I've testified before subcommittees and Senate Energy and that was Energy and Natural Senate. I've forgotten now, Tom. You're testing my memory.
Okay, you're down in Austin. What was it like going through the blackout of 21? And did you lose power?
We did lose power. I live here in central Austin, and my wife, Lauren, and I lost power for almost, about 45 hours. But we were lucky. And I think it was one of the moments. In fact, I published a piece on Forbes during the time when we were in blackout, pointing out that the perils of the Electrify Everything push, because it made it clear to me then, well, this is crazy town. You don't want to put all of your energy eggs in one basket. And we were fortunate. We had a big pile of firewood. We had a natural gas connection. So we had hot water. We could cook. We could, heat part of the house because of the fireplace. But it reminded me that if you are in an electric only home and you lose power, well, you're screwed, and we weren't. And since that time, I've written a lot of articles about this Electrify Everything push, including pieces I've published on Substack about the dark money groups and these climate-focused NGOs and alt-energy NGOs and Rewiring America that are pushing what I think is not just bad policy. It's dangerous policy, because they want to force people to be solely reliant on the electric grid at a time when the electric grid is already shaky. And and also I think forfeit or rather energy security, which I think is, again, bad policy and it's regressive, but we can talk about that more if you like.
Yeah. So with the benefit of hindsight, what do you think was the root cause of those problems in February of 21 there?
Well, it was stinking cold was the main problem. I mean, and for a long time. I don't want to get too technical, but damn cold, right? For 6 days, I lived in Austin for almost 40 years. We were sub-freezing temperatures for 6 days in a row, which has never, in my recollection, never happened before. So it was a number of failures, of course. These kinds of things are never just one thing. But I'll put it bluntly, I think that there was overinvestment in renewables in Texas and underinvestment in reliable forms of generation. So, there was a talk immediately after, and those Republicans down in Texas, they're blaming wind and solar, and how dare them, and how stupid that is. Well, wind went to effectively zero for days in a row. There was no wind energy production. And so all of that load shifted onto the gas grid, and then of course, gas-fired generation, almost all of it. Well, and some of the gas supplies froze up. That's absolutely true. But we also had this situation where we'd had many of the gas compressors were electric. Well, then they were shut off because there wasn't enough electricity. So the shortages of electricity led to shortages of gas, which led to shortages of electricity. So there were a number of factors, and there's still a lot of talk. In fact, the Texas legislature is meeting now, and they're passing legislation aimed at resolving some of these deficiencies, I'll call them that, or I would say misdesigned aspects of the Texas grid. Whether they will be enough, I can't say. But what we've created in Texas is this energy only market, and the result is that no one is responsible. And it was a market failure. Well, who created the market? Well, a bunch of lawyers. Well, why are they lawyers? Because they couldn't do the math to get into engineering school. So we have this kind of Rube Goldberg, I'll call it that, this Rube Goldberg system of a market. Well, will everybody show up? Will it work perfectly? It works most of the time, but when it doesn't work, things get bad.
Am I correct that there was a Berkshire Hathaway solution somehow, that they had a proposal that was going to fix it? Do you know if was that turned down, or was it a good proposal, or what do you think?
Tom, I've been sorting through these issues and trying to figure out what is the best way forward. And I'll preface my reply by saying that when I was working on my book on Enron, now more than 20 years ago, I was interviewing a guy, Jim Walzell, who had worked for Houston Pipelines before it became Enron. And he said, Bryce, I don't think this deregulation is going to be good for consumers. This is 20 years ago. We used to have vertically integrated utilities, right? They owned the generation, they owned the wires, they owned the meter, and they were responsible for providing this reliable power. We don't have that anymore. And so we've created this system where there is no chain of command. There is no one that is ultimately responsible, except, we can blame ERCOT. Well, what's ERCOT? Well, ERCOT's just a market manager. It's not the provider. So, I think that, it's in a state like Texas where, we're going to have competition. Well, but electricity is fundamentally different, and we can get into that if you like, but it's not a commodity. Electricity is a service, and we've confused commodities with service. And again, that's a longer conversation for probably what we have today, but it goes to this idea that I think is a misapprehension of what electricity is, which has been a lot of my work in the last few years.
Yeah, if you'd like to talk about that vertical integration a little more, that would be great. But I listened to your podcast with B.F. Randall, and I thought that was just tremendously good, where he talks about electricity not being a commodity, it's a service, and he compares it to a random Uber, all that stuff. I think that's great stuff. Yeah.
Wasn't that a great analogy that, okay, yes. Well, yeah, you call an Uber and they say, well, I can come in 6 hours. Well, you don't need an Uber in 6 hours. You need it right now. So then you need 2 Ubers. You need the Fluber, as he called it, right? A random Uber, and you need the reliable Uber. Well, therein is I think it's a very good analogy for the electric grid, which is that, and there's still a lot of people saying, we need to build more renewables. And that's what all the federal tax credits are incentivizing, right? Not just a few billion, $240 billion has been appropriated under the Inflation Reduction Act and other measures that Congress has passed to subsidize wind and solar, which is roughly 8x what's being given to nuclear. So, you follow the money. Where's what's going to be built? Well, what are you incenting? And you're incenting more solar and wind, but there aren't the same incentives to build reliable generation to be there when solar and wind go away. And that's what we have to have.
So you must have the ear of some people who are influential, given that you're able to testify in Congress and stuff. Do you talk to people one-on-one, politicians, and let them know what's actually happening and try to educate them?
I don't really see that as my job. I'm flattered if they ask me, but I don't seek it out. I'm a reporter. And if they want to get my view on the world, I'll be happy to give it to them. I do a lot of different things, but what am I? I'm a reporter. And I almost said just a reporter. I am a reporter. I want to report on what's going on and doing it as factually and as completely as I can to the best of my ability. And, I'm not the best, I'm not the worst, but I've got some experience and I think some views on what's happening and what has happened to give me some credibility in the market. So if people, whether at the state level or, so on, it doesn't happen much, I'll guarantee you. But it's, when they ask me, got too many opinions to keep them all to myself, Tom. So I'm happy to share them.
No, I think it's great. It looks like you're putting out those opinions all sorts of different ways, right? You're on TikTok, you got your Substack, and you've got your website and your movie and books, etc. It seems like you're kind of covering all the bases there to try to get it out. No matter how people prefer to get the information, they can get it from you somehow, right?
Well, it's been a challenge, and I'll credit my daughter, Mary Bryce, who's our oldest, and she's wonderful. She's a singer-songwriter. She lives in Los Angeles, and it was about a year ago. She said, Dad, you need to get on TikTok. You can talk. It's almost exactly the conversation. Dad, you can talk. You need to do this. And so I thought, well, TikTok, but I have had fun and had, some traction with making short videos. I did one on Ford Motor Company and the fact that they recently announced that they're losing $34,000 on every EV that they make. So I just did, with my phone, it just this, I'm not going to say a dumb little video, but I, held it up and I talked for, a minute and 30 seconds and said, isn't this amazing that here is Ford Motor Company telling the world they're losing money on every EV that they make, but they're going to make up for it in volume, right? As the old joke goes. But that one little video with no technical, no nothing, it had like 65,000 views, which, it's like, well, okay, well, that's kind of cool, so yeah, I want my content to be seen. I want people to read what I write. And if they don't read, then I'll make a short video. And if they don't like that, well, read my book, or I'll watch, I'll make a film, or, so I've been lucky, like I said, to be able to try these different content platforms and see how they work. And then, of course, the podcast and using YouTube and the rest of it. It's an exciting time to be an independent journalist and also Substack, robertbryce.substack.com, which I'm really just begun publishing only there because I found it's a very liberating and a really sturdy platform that has been growing and to me is very exciting.
When you filmed your movie, it seems like you got enormous amounts of material because you actually went all around the world, right? And you interviewed people. I thought it was fascinating when you were talking about the generator mafia. I had never heard of this term. Oh, where was that? Was that Lebanon?
That was in Beirut.
Yeah. I don't know if in more than one country, did you encounter people who are paying more than one power bill? They have their real power bill and another one for backup or something? Yeah.
Well, not that I saw directly, but I know this is a very similar situation in Iraq and has been since the U.S. invasion, right? So one of the things that I learned, Tom, and I think is very clear that electric grids are almost perfect reflections of the societies they power, right? So you will see the robustness or the lack thereof in electric grids, what exists in the society. So Lebanon is famously corrupt, as is Iraq, and in Beirut, and throughout Lebanon, nearly everyone in Lebanon pays two electric bills. One to Électricité du Liban, which is the grid operator, a government-owned entity, and they pay another bill to the generator mafia. And the generator mafia, they connect their generator to your average Lebanese home, and when the power goes out from the grid, you get power from the generator mafia. And sometimes, in many cases, we heard people were paying as much or more to the generator mafia than they were to EDL. So this is what happens. People, one thing that I know, I call the iron law of electricity. People are not going to sit in the dark. They will do whatever they have to do to get the electricity they need. And if that requires them to pay two electric bills, own their own generator, pay the generator mafia, that's what they're going to do.
That is a big problem, right? If the generator mafia is making a lot of money doing this, they don't want the real power to be 100% available and push them out of business.
Well, it's a perverse incentive. You're right, that they don't they don't want the electric grid in Lebanon to work well, because if it does, then they're out of business. But I think it's interesting. I'll make a quick observation there, Tom, that goes back to what we were talking about with regard to a service versus a commodity. So the generator mafia, they don't, when they connect, if you connect to the generator mafia, you lived in Beirut, let's say, well, they don't charge you on a kilowatt hour basis. They charge you on how many amps you want. So they're providing you a service. And remember, volts are, if you compare electricity to water, so watts would be gallons or liters. That's the volume that you get. The volts is the pressure that the water is coming into your home, and the amps is the flow rate, right? So flow rate matters, right? So your refrigerator, your air conditioner use a higher flow rate than, say a little light, or maybe my computer. So what the generator mafia charges their customers is based on amperage, not on watt hours. And a few years ago, in fact, it was when we were there, the Lebanese government said, we're going to require the generator mafia to put meters on every one of their customers. And the generator mafia said back to the government, we're not going to do it. And if you try to do this, we'll shut off the power to everyone to teach you a lesson. And so the government backed off. But it goes to that point about, a meter is indicating a commodity, right? A volume of electricity that you're consuming. Whereas the generator mafia is saying, no, you can have as many gallons as you want. What we have to provide is a flow rate. We have to provide amperes. We're providing you with a service, and we demand to be paid for the service. And we don't care. You can use many watt hours and split those flow rate over however you want, but it's a service, not a commodity. And that was one of the real life examples of this happening in an electric grid in Lebanon.
And they did that, the generator mafia, because they didn't want to put up meters, or that's the reason why they went with the flow rate idea?
Well, I think that's part of it, right? That would complicate their business. But they also had a machine that would produce a certain number of amps, right? And they could only provide a certain number of people with that amount of amperage. So they were seeing this as, we're providing a service, and you can decide how you manage the flow however you want. But it made no sense to them from a business standpoint to put meters on. Yeah, it would be an additional expense, but their system was constrained by the amps in the system, right? Not the number of watt hours they could sell. That's my read of how it worked.
Then I think you went to India and you discovered there's a nest of power lines everywhere, and people were putting hooks onto the lines to steal electricity. Is it just a matter of putting a hook up there, or did they have to do something special to pirate electricity?
Well, there were people who specialized in pirating electricity as well, right? So there was, very weak governments, and this was a big problem in Iraq as well. After Saddam was deposed, Saddam was a ruthless bastard, right? Nobody's going to sit around and say, "Oh, we love Saddam," but electricity theft was not a problem under Saddam Hussein, because the Iraqis are saying, "Well, you get caught stealing electricity from Uncle Saddam, bad things can happen." So, the system worked pretty well. And you can look at World Bank data that shows when Saddam came into power until the first Iraq war, it was pretty gradual and increasing consumption of electricity in Iraqi society, because he managed the grid, right? And the grid had integrity. But once then the wars, the first Iraq war and then the second one, particularly after Saddam was deposed, the theft became rampant throughout the society. And the same as you can see in Nigeria, where, the system doesn't work because people steal, and theft is the enemy of light. So if you have I talk about the three imperatives for an electric grid. It's integrity, capital, and fuel. If you don't have integrity, if the society doesn't have integrity, people steal all the time, the grid is not going to work, because, you have to pay for power. If you want it continuously, if you want it to be reliable, people have to pay for what they use. You can give it away for a while for free, but eventually the system runs into the ground.
Yeah, I think one of the people you interviewed in India said the piracy was up to 40%. I believe I heard that figure. What's the solution there? How can they fix that without going to the Saddam Hussein route?
Which is not necessarily the most desirable.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's about the system itself, right? The system of government, that you have to have a culture where people agree that they're going to pay their fair share, right? And that the government isn't just going to be responsible for giving you whatever you demand. And this was one of the key issues in Lebanon, where Hezbollah controls significant parts of Beirut. And Hezbollah told Electricité du Liban, well, this is our quadrant of the city. It wasn't an exact quadrant, but you're going to give us power for free. And EDL would say, well, no, we're not. And so Hezbollah said, okay, we'll declare a general strike. And we'll shut down the whole city. And the EDL said, okay, never mind. So, there just becomes this system where, their entitlements, people stake out. They say, well, this is what we're going to take. We're not going to pay for it. And it's very corrosive. But again, this is a part of a reflection of the society. If the society isn't working, if it's not, people don't believe in the system, what I call esprit de grid, they believe in the system and that they agree they're going to pay for it, then it becomes very tenuous.
I wanted to drop back and just talk about one great point you made at the very start of your documentary about the importance of elevators in modern society, that when they had electricity and then the buildings could be over like 6 stories high. I had never thought about that, but that's an excellent point.
Sure. Well, it is a fascinating part of American history that is not well known. And I'll recommend to your listeners, you go to New York and you're in Lower Manhattan and you're around City Hall in Lower Manhattan. Look across the street to the west of City Hall, and there's a building on the corner there. It's the Postal Telegraph Building, the old Postal Telegraph Building. That is where Frank Sprague, who is one of the great inventors in not just in American history, but world history, perhaps the most accomplished and least heralded and least known inventor, he pioneered not only the electric rail car, but the electric elevator. And he accomplished that. The electric elevator, his work on the electric streetcar happened in Richmond, Virginia. It perfected the design for horizontal transportation that was powered by electricity, and used and employed designs there and then elsewhere that in electric vehicles and electric trains and so on that are still used today, the basic designs, but then went to New York and perfected the electric elevator in the Postal Telegraph Building. So as Jesse Ausubel says very well, height is electrical. So before the age of electricity, cities all over the world, the maximum height was, 4 stories, maybe 5 stories. It was only enough that, high enough where people would be willing to walk up that many flights of stairs. But once you had elevators that could move people vertically and do it so reliably, then the cities got taller. And when you electrified them, they became a lot taller. So the landmark building, of course, in Lower Manhattan being one of them, is the Woolworths building. But yes, there were, to answer your question directly, I've given you a long answer, but you could use steam engines. They were used as well to create hydraulic elevators, but they weren't as fast, weren't as efficient. And the electric elevator was just it changed the fundamental geography of our cities, and led to the age of skyscrapers within a matter of years.
I thought it was interesting that you said in our early elevators, people were used to horse-powered transportation with sudden surprise starts and stops, so people would hold on. And if the elevator jogged a little bit, they weren't as freaked out as they would be nowadays.
It is amazing. We're not that far away from the horse-drawn era. My grandmother was born in 1885, I believe. So my great-grandfather homesteaded in Oklahoma in the Cherokee Strip land run of 1892. I mean, this isn't ancient history, right? When you had streetcars that were still pulled by horses in America. But once you electrified transportation, electrified rail cars, and electrified elevators, it fundamentally changed how cities are shaped, because it allowed cities to be much bigger. Because remember, generally, when we travel, we don't care how far something is. It takes us how long does it take us to get there, right? You don't say, oh, it's 1.3 miles. Well, no, it's going to take you 20 minutes because there's traffic, right? So we think in time travel. When we travel, we think more about time than we do distance.
Yeah, electrifying a lot of things was clearly a huge win, but later on now, you've been saying nowadays trying to electrify everything might be overdoing it. There's a transformer shortage right now, partly because of the Electrify Everything deal. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. This is a story that I'd heard about. I speak at a lot of electric cooperatives. That's how I make my money. Generally speaking, I do a lot of public speaking. And I was in an event in Grand Rapids, Michigan last year, and I met a guy named Matt Brandrup. He's the CEO of the Rural Electric Supply Cooperative. And he presented some amazing presentation on the price increases for utility products. So everything from wood poles to conductors to copper wire to pad-mounted and pole-mounted transformers. And so I wrote a piece on Substack that I just published a couple of days ago, robertbryce.substack.com, talking about this incredible increase, this inflation rate in utility products, which was 18% last year. And it was 14% the year before that. So in 2 years, you compound the inflation rate. That's 34% price jump across the board for all utility products. So the government, through the Inflation Reduction Act, has just dropped this neutron bomb of cash onto the electric sector and said, oh, we'll go electrify everything, electric cars, solar and wind, just go to it with no concern for the supply chain. So what has happened is now there is a very dire shortage of transformers, pad-mounted, pole-mounted, power transformers, that is across the electric sector. And prices are much higher. Lead times are as 2 years in some cases for some types of transformers. So we're seeing, and this is goes further into the supply chain for availability of specialty steel called grain-oriented steel. It's a multifaceted problem with several different issues that, including labor shortages, that are feeding this. But it's just another example of how, in my view, you have government policy that has certain intentions but doesn't consider what the knock-on effects will be.
I think BF Randall was talking about that too, that let's just go off and electrify everything, but it takes so much diesel fuel to actually produce everything you need to electrify everything. You need enormous amounts of copper and all this other stuff. I didn't quite understand the part about the if you need more diesel fuel, automatically regular gasoline prices will drop. That sound right?
Well, and this gets into the mechanics of the refining process. So you have a barrel of crude. Well, a barrel of crude is, it could be of different types of grades of crude, right? There are different heavier crudes, lighter crudes. Lighter crudes make more gasoline. Heavier crudes are generally better for making diesel. Well, you can carve out, and I've talked to one of the other guests I've had on the Power Hungry podcast is Robert Rapier. He's an expert on refining. Well, so in any given refinery, you can tweak the amount of diesel versus gasoline that you produce from a given barrel of crude. But as you tweak that, then you produce more of other things, right? You can make a little more diesel and a little less gasoline. So all of those things function together, right? So I don't know necessarily that more diesel equals more gasoline. I don't know that that's the fact, but I think the broader point, and one that not only BF Randall has made, but so is Simon Michaud on the podcast, was that we are in a situation now where, with all this hype around the energy transition, which we can talk about, it is hype. It's just unbelievable, the amount of hype. But it's going to require massive amounts of metals, mining, and magnets, and mining metals and magnets. And the ore quality, the ores that we're mining now, are not as high quality as the ones that we were mining last year, last decade, last century. So miners are chasing lower quality ores, which means you're going to have to mine more rock, move more rock, process more rock, all of which is very energy intensive, including in particular diesel fuel, because almost all of that machinery in mines runs on diesel. So there's no free lunch, Tom. I've been a longtime critic of wind and solar because of the land use conflicts, and I've been reporting on that for a long time. In fact, I was in Michigan a few days ago meeting with people in Ida Township, Michigan, many of whom are fighting solar projects in their townships. So there are many problems with renewables, the incurable intermittency, problems with material inputs, including solar supply chains that are connected with China. But the other, of course, is this land use issue and where are you going to put it? And so and we see all across the country now, the numbers are 375 or so communities from Maine to Hawaii have rejected wind projects since 2015. We're over 110 rejections of solar since 2017. There's this bias toward this idea, we'll just put it out there, out there in flyover country. Well, there are people that live out in flyover country, and their reaction is, we don't want your crap, go put it somewhere else.
Then to switch gears, how worried are you about some sort of massive Carrington event or something happening on the sun to blow out our electrical system? How much should we worry about that?
Tom, how many things can we worry about at once? I say that as being kind of flip, and I suppose it is, but we're looking at Russia and, a weakened Vladimir Putin, and what does he do when, things get bad? Desperate men do desperate things. Will he go nuclear, tactical nuclear? Do we have to worry about climate change? Do we have to worry about, food shortages? Do we, eggs, the price of eggs? But do we have to worry about solar flares in a Carrington event, which would result in a big pulse of electromagnetic radiation that could fry the electric grid completely and lead us back into the dark ages? Or we have some bad actor created an electromagnetic pulse, which would be hard. Because they'd need a nuclear warhead to do it. But yeah, sure. The Carrington event happened in 1840s or 1850s, and the pulse was so strong. Apparently, telegraph wires were energizing themselves, and But this was long before we had, a desk full of electronics, all of which would be useless if we had such a massive solar flare as what happened back then.
I don't know why I'm so amazed that the telegraph wires continued to work for a while after they had no power. That's amazing.
I know, isn't it? It's odd to think about it. But if you it's a Faraday cage. If you want to protect yourself, you create a Faraday cage. It's like a big, steel or metal shield over your stuff, and it will divert the electromagnetic radiation away from your vulnerable stuff. That's why a lot of military installations are inside mountains and underground and so on, because they wouldn't be affected by this big pulse of radiation. But I don't know. I have too many other things to think about, Tom, to worry about that one.
Do you think that the government does have some transformers, et cetera, extra ones stored underground so that New York City could get power again after an EMP pulse knocked it out? Anything like that? Or I guess we wouldn't know.
I don't know that this is one of the issues that has been brought up repeatedly, that similar to a strategic petroleum reserve, that the federal government should have a strategic reserve of high voltage transformers, lower voltage transformers, but you would need a bunch of them. And remember, this supply chain in particular is very constrained. We don't have enough of what we don't have enough to supply current demand, much less supply current demand and create a backlog inventory. So these are issues that should be front and center. And I know I was just sending emails with my friend Chris Perry at the Kentucky Electric Cooperatives, and they've been meeting with people in the White House on this very issue, because this is and Joy Ditto from the American Public Power Association, she's talked about this. This issue is across all utilities, co-ops, investor-owned, publicly owned utilities. All of them are very concerned about this, and all of them are, talking to officials in Washington and trying to do something about it. But it's a very difficult problem.
Another topic I just discovered is on your website, you have a renewable rejection database. I thought that was very interesting. That it looks like the graphs are going up, that more renewable facilities are getting rejected.
Yeah. Well, frankly, it's getting harder and harder to keep up, because it just requires continuous monitoring. I'll put it that way. There are so many communities across the country that saying, we don't want your solar project, we don't want your wind project. I mentioned I was in Ida Township in Michigan a few days ago talking to locals, fighting a company called Apex Clean Energy, which has been pushing for wind and solar projects across the country, facing friction in a lot of places, including upstate New York and Somerset and Yates, New York, where they had a project called Lighthouse Wind, 200 megawatts of wind. Had been trying to force that project onto the local communities. The local communities rejected it over and over. The company finally quit. But yes, back in 2015, there's that old line from W. Edwards Deming who said, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And so I began just, with an Excel spreadsheet and started tracking these projects that were being rejected or restricted. And I've been consistently doing it ever since then. And now since 2015, 375 or so wind projects, or wind energy restrictions or rejections, solar projects as well. Last year alone in Ohio, alone, you had something like 50 townships, local governments reject or ban wind or solar or both. So, these, there are a lot of elite academics at Princeton, at Stanford, elsewhere, who create these elaborate models and say, well, we'll just put, hundreds of megawatts of new solar and wind, out there, and those rural bumpkins are going to like it. Well, those bumpkins, they ain't bumpkins, and they don't want that crap in their neighborhoods, and they're pushing back, and well, they should.
Do you think we're still going to see huge solar facilities up in Canada? Like Google is going to put them up in Canada and then pretend they're running a data center using the energy from those panels far away. It's just accounting fraud as far as I'm concerned. It's happening, isn't it?
Well, and that was one of the questions I remember. There's a woman named Ruth Miller. She's from Breesville Township in Michigan. And she asked me, she said, what are these guys doing? What are they doing with these? So it's Michigan. It's cloudy here all the time. Why are they putting solar here? And I just told her, well, look, the investment tax credit, these developers get paid back in tax credits based on what they spend, not much how much solar they produce. So yeah, they care how much solar they produce, but the ITC pays them based on the investment, not on how many watt hours they produce. So, you complicate the market, or I would say queer the market. You distort the market by introducing these massive subsidies that then I think lead to malinvestment. And I think that's what we've seen, a lot of malinvestment. And of course, for these tech companies, they are eager to act green. They're eager to appear net zero or claim net zero. And this is just part of that game. And never mind that each of their data center buildings has a massive 1 or 2 megawatt or 3 megawatt diesel genset right outside the door in case everything else falls apart, because they're not going to let their facility go dark.
Do you have thoughts on whether governments are going to use climate reasons to shut down Bitcoin mining? There's a bunch of crypto mining going on, I think, in Iceland when you went there. But What do you think about that?
Well, my son, Michael, is an avid crypto guy. And so I'm not anti-crypto. Although I've told him, and we've talked about it many times, I don't know why any government would allow somebody else to come in and take over the fiat currency, right? And we've seen now the federal government cracking down on crypto, and Silicon Valley Bank was part of that. Other banks, we've seen this it's not just the beginning of a crackdown. I think it's part of an ongoing crackdown. And lately, I think the lawsuit against Binance and so on. But I see crypto, if you just look at it, what is it? It's an arbitrage on the price of electricity. And they put these crypto mines wherever electricity is cheap and try and produce something that is a store of value. And that Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, any of these other forms of tokens and coins is a form of stored value based on the price of electricity. So to me, it's not that much different. I'm not saying I'm an avid crypto guy or promoting crypto, but it's not that much different from gold mining in that regard. You're trying to create something that's energy intensive that is going to have a store of value. Will you be able to take that to, Starbucks and buy a cup of coffee? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But I watched the crypto market. I haven't really invested in it, but it is fundamentally just an arbitrage on the price of electricity into a stored value. And there are not a lot of active crypto miners in Texas who are using wind energy in West Texas, which is many times very low cost. And then when there's more demand on the grid, they shut their crypto mines down and feed the power back into the grid. So, to me, it's another source of demand on the grid that can be managed at relatively low cost. So I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I understand, it does use a staggering amount of power.
I was curious about you being based in Austin as a podcaster. What is going on with so many podcasters being in Austin?
Well, I don't know. I have the SM7B, the Shure SM7B microphone. I had it, and I was here in Austin before Joe Rogan came, and Joe Rogan's now in Austin. So I am almost Joe Rogan, Tom, because I have the same microphone and I live in Austin. There are a lot. Chris Williamson, I guess, moved to Austin. There are a bunch of other podcasters here. I should probably pay more attention to them and get, more plugged in. Generally, I've been so busy, I don't even listen to my own podcast. So I listen to a very few others. Jordan Peterson, of course, is one of my favorites. And I listen to Rogan sometimes and when I know who's on there. But why is Austin? Austin is just a hot place to live now. We got people moving here from California left and right and other states. So, that's part of the, there's a lot of things it's a nice place to live.
Okay. Who else is doing work that you would recommend? Like through you, I've learned about, there's a guy named Pettimore, I think John Pettimore, and Meredith Angwin.
He's a mining guy and very savvy. I follow him on Twitter. I admire the work that Meredith Angwin has done. Her book called Shorting the Grid. She's been on my podcast, I think, 5 times. A younger writer is Emmett Penny. He publishes Grid Brief, which is a daily newsletter, comes out 5 times a week. I have a lot of admiration for Emmett and what he does. Another writer and podcaster is my friend Chris Kiefer. He's a Canadian, has been really active in leading the charge for new nuclear in Canada and deserves a lot of credit for his work in extending the lives of nuclear reactors in Canada and being a voice of reason there. He's also a medical doctor. He's 6'9". He's an unusual character, but a dear friend of mine. So, what has been exciting, one of the exciting parts of my job is getting, to talk to all these people, get to know them and call many of them my friends. And so there's, these are scary times, but they are also incredibly interesting times. So, those people are ones that I follow and admire.
Yeah, you've had quite a lineup on your podcast, right? I saw Bjorn Lomborg on there, Michael Schellenberger, Judith Curry, all sorts of people.
Yeah. Judith has been, I think she has a book coming out later this year, and she's been, very provocative. And Schellenberger, of course, I think is killing it on Substack, and have a new episode coming out today with Alina Chan, who wrote the book Viral with Matt Ridley, who Ridley's been on the podcast a couple times, but talking to her about COVID and the origins of COVID. And she's a very interesting woman, PhD in molecular biology, and talking about the, why we haven't had a full investigation into the origins of COVID still, 3 years after the lockdown started. So I'm having great fun with you and with the podcast, and it looks like you are as well. To me, it's just great to be able to talk to people and see, well, tell me about how you see the world. So that's it's changed my brand. It's been a lot of fun. It's a lot of work too.
Any other points you'd like to make before we wrap up this one?
robertbryce.substack.com. Did I say that? robertbryce.substack.com.
Yeah.
No, I think, I'm proud of the work that I do. I think that one of the things, I know you write, follow the energy sector. I think, if I was going to encourage your listeners, know your numbers, know your units, know how to transfer, like SI units, know what the difference between exajoules and BTUs and tons of oil equivalent, to really be conversant and be an advocate for rational energy and power policy. You have to know your numbers and you have to know your units. So that's something that I find even in people that are in the energy and power sector don't know their units, and I will castigate them for it. You don't know what an exajoule is. You're in the energy business. You can't. This is not okay. So that would be my admonition for the day. How about that?
I found your link tree, and I put that in the show notes here because I love that whole link tree thing where you got everything known to man there. You click on that, and you can find your movie and everything else all in one place. So very good.
Yeah, very handy.
All right. So thanks a ton for being on here, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks a million,
Robert Bryce.
Tom.
All right. Goodbye.